Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And from wherever you are listening from, we are welcoming you and glad to have you on today's show. And today we're going to talk about reinvention. So, what does reinvention mean to you? The definition I found is that it is the action or process through which something is changed so much that it appears to be entirely new. Would you say that retiring as a police chief to become a full-time artist and writer is a change that appears to be entirely new? I think the key word here is appears. We take ourselves with us through whatever changes that we make. And during a transition from a full-time career to whatever is next, we will probably change some of our behaviors. We will probably change some of our attitudes about what is possible and some of our attitudes about aging. But we don't become someone entirely new, do we? I think we evolve. I have been through so many transitions in my life, and I know every transition has been an evolution. I learn new things about myself. I gain new strengths and insights. I reset my beliefs about what is possible, what I need, and what I want. Transitions are a time for introspection and growth and new doors opening. Today, we're going to talk to John P. Weiss about what his transition was like from full-time policing to becoming a full-time artist. And if you did not get a chance to read his newsletter this week, I'm going to encourage you again to subscribe. Each week, I look forward to receiving his newsletter, and I know that you will as well. So I'm going to share his website information with you at the end of this show so that you too can subscribe and take advantage of that. Before I bring him on, I wanted to share some of my never too old stories with you. And as you know, I always ask if anybody out there has a wonderful never too old story to share, please email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz and we'll get that story on the show. And for today, my first story is about someone who fractured their hip as an older person. And we all know that can be very devastating. For Val Coleman, it introduced her to a new sport. She took up rowing, not in the water, but on rowing machines. And now she rows competitively. At 93, Val currently holds the world record for women in the 90 to 94 age group for rowing on rowing machines. Who knew there was a competition for that? Val jokes it was the nursing home or get better. And fortunately for her, she found rowing as a way to get better. Val tells us, I would say to everybody, the older you get, the more exercise you need. From 60 on, you've really got to try harder and harder. For my second story, I want to introduce you to Fred Kirsch. Fred has been a sports writer for the Virginian Pilot newspaper in Norfolk, Virginia. And in 2004, at the age of 62, he saw the writing on the wall. Newspapers were downsizing, and he wanted to be prepared. So Fred went back to school to study anatomy and physiology, and he signed up for the personal trainer certification through the American College of Sports Medicine. When the buyout came from the newspaper, he thought he was ready. But the local gyms and sports clubs did not seem interested in hiring a trainer who was 66 years old. But a year later, took him a year, he found a position at the Lifestyle Center at the Chesapeake Regional Medical Center, and there he's working with people recovering from heart surgery, hip replacements, and other medical issues. And most of his clients are in their 80s and 90s, and he feels that his age, he's now 69, really helps him connect with them. So our never too old stories for today remind us to keep moving, make some form of exercise a part of your life, and you can reinvent yourself and find new ways to be of service. And like I said, today's show is about reinvention. So all of you wonderful people listening, if you know somebody who is in that process or looking for some creative inspiration, tag them, tell them about the show, have them join us and listen live, or point them to the podcast and the recording, and they can hear it later. And with that, I want to bring John on. Hi, John.
Hi, good morning, Wendy. How are you?
I am great. So glad. I'm so excited to have you on today's show.
Well, it's a pleasure, and what a great lead-in, too. I love what you said, we carry ourselves with us. That's so true.
We do, don't we?
Yeah.
We do. I know sometimes you're like, I want to really totally reinvent, but no, there you go.
Well, we're so many versions of ourselves over the years, and we forget that. There's still the 10-year-old child in us, and the 30-year-old, and the 40-year-old.
So true. So let me tell them just a brief bio of you, John. He is, as I said, a retired police chief with the Scotts Valley Police Department in Northern California and spent 26 years in law enforcement. But then he decided to retire early to pursue his creative life full-time. John is now a full-time artist and writer. He paints mostly landscapes, draws whimsical cartoons. I love your cartoons. And writes poignant stories and essays about life. John is the author of An Artful Life, inspirational stories and essays for the artist in everyone. Yep. And The Cartoon Art of John P. Weiss. And I look forward to his newsletter every Saturday, like I said, which includes some of his essays, some artwork, generally a cartoon, and a book recommendation.
Got to recommend those books.
I love that. You are a prolific reader for sure. So I'm curious, John, what was the defining moment when you finally decided to retire and pursue art as a full-time pursuit?
You know what? People have asked me that before. Was there one defining moment? And there really wasn't. It was more a culmination. I'd been in law enforcement 26 years. The last 10 years of my career, I was the police chief. So I really was less of a police officer, like in uniform, and more of a politician. A lot of police chiefs, we wear suits, we go to city council meetings, it's hiring, firing, budgets, a lot of meetings, things like that. And I'd reached a point in my 10th year as police chief where I just felt ready for a change. The department was in good shape, the staffing was good. A lot of the technological changes I wanted to bring on board in the department had happened. And so the timing was right. I had good people ready to take on leadership positions in the organization. And I just felt this strong calling and pull to dive into my creative life full time. And so that's what I did. I probably had 5 years to go to max out my pension if I wanted to. Most people go 30 years or so, but I went 26 and said, I'm ready, and pulled the pin and started the next chapter.
Wow, I bet you had a lot of people shaking their heads going, what were you thinking?
Well, there's some people that wanted me to stay on longer, and that was very flattering. But there was plenty of other people that knew me and knew my many interests in the creative arts. And so they understood. And, 26 years is a fine measure for a career. And the timing felt right, and my family was supportive.
So I'm curious, if you always had this creative interest, what drew you to policing in the first place, to law enforcement?
My father. I think, like a lot of young people, we have dreams. I was in a rock band. I played classical piano growing up. I wanted to be a rock star for a short while, and I was always drawing. And my father, who was a very pragmatic, conservative man, was a judge. Oh. And he always told me, John, it's great that you love art. You should pursue it, but have something to fall back on. Get a good education. Find a career that is reliable and stable. And then you can parallel with that your passions. And if the passions take off, great. You can make a decision if you want to transition. But have something to fall back on. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And then if that fails, where are you? So he encouraged me to get an education. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. He was steering me towards the law.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in high school, and we had a deputy sheriff came to our high school class, our government class, and he spoke about his career in law enforcement. And I thought, wow, that sounds so exciting and challenging and different, and every day is a different day. And I thought that could be really exciting. And so I studied criminal justice administration in college. And then when I graduated with my degree, my father talked me into going to grad school. I was just really anxious to dive into law enforcement then and start my career like my friends were in school.
Right.
And he said, no, just invest 2 more years and it'll pay off down the road in your career. So I moved back home. I spent the next 2 years going to graduate school, and I worked part-time at Apple Computer in their security department. Which was great because I could study in these obscure buildings in the back of the Apple buildings and guard shacks. And I got my master's degree, and then I dove into law enforcement. So it was really just being pragmatic. My dad wanted me to be pragmatic. He never said don't pursue art. He was always supportive, but he wanted to make sure that I had something stable to fall back on.
So that's interesting, because I think most of our parents in that age group, my father as well, I wanted to study one thing and he said, no, you should do this. I didn't listen as well as you, but did you give your son the same kind of advice?
Yeah, I always told him the same thing, more or less, but I told him you really have to want to find something that you can enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be, your passion. In fact, sometimes that can be a bad idea, is to try to chase your passion. If your passion is, writing poetry, great, but it may be very hard to make a living at that. So I think it's better to find a career that you can pursue that interests you and that provides some security. And then while you're doing that, you can always moonlight and pursue your passions as well. And a lot of times when people pursue a career, it turns into a passion and they don't realize that. I think I mentioned to you the other day, we were talking, Cal Newport wrote a book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. And in that book, he talked about how chasing your passion is actually bad advice. It's much better to pursue skills. He says skills trump passions, is that you want to develop skills that are rare and valuable skills. So the person that maybe becomes a heart surgeon has developed rare and valuable skills that not only do they make a good living off of, but a lot of times it becomes a passion of theirs too. Maybe the person wanted to be a rock star like me when they were a teenager, but they sort of got educated and fell into a career, and then that career becomes a passion. And in a way, law enforcement became a passion for me too. I found that I really enjoyed helping people, serving my community. I liked the adventure of it and the stories and the people I met. It could be very satisfying, at times very challenging, but that career molded and shaped aspects of my personality that needed development that art would not have given me. So in many ways, it helped me.
So I want to get into that, but first I want to ask you, were you able to continue to pursue some of your creative passions while you were also in law enforcement?
Well, it's like what you said about we carry ourselves with us. The muse never died inside me. And from my beginning year as a rookie cop, where I was drawing cartoons of my colleagues and making people laugh during our roll calls, and I was the one that they always asked to draw, the invitations for bachelor parties and retirement functions, and so I was always drawing cartoons and entertaining my colleagues. And I started drawing later on for the local newspapers, editorial cartoons. I moonlighted for a number of years with 2 newspapers in the county, and really enjoyed that. So that sustained me. My creative passions sustained me through my career. They helped me. They helped my career through developing my writing and my artwork. So it really became a refuge at times when there was stressful periods in my career. When I took up landscape painting, I found that to be an amazing escape to get outdoors and paint on location. I studied in Idaho with a well-known painter, and that really was very fulfilling.
So how do you feel like your policing, your law enforcement work has served you now in this new creative lifestyle that you're in?
Discipline and focus. My career taught me discipline and focus. And I needed more discipline and focus. A lot of creatives sometimes tend to be a bit scattershot. I'm interested in this, I'm interested in that. I want to draw cartoons, I want to write, let's do photography. So I always had these different interests, and that's great. But you can risk becoming a jack of all trades, master of none. So sometimes you have to learn how to discipline yourself. And so in law enforcement, I learned how to create routines. I learned what it means to get up early and to be responsible and to be reliable. And I think that carries over very much so for creatives today. If you want to be successful as a painter, a writer, a podcaster, you have to deliver. You have to show up on time. You have to learn the technology. You have to discipline yourself to stay focused. And so this is what I worked on. And it looks like your screen is gone blank. So I don't know if that means your guests can hear me and not see you, but you have disappeared from the screen, which means we must be having technological difficulties. So this may be a one-man show. I don't know. Hopefully you'll come back, because I've definitely lost you. Are you there, Wendy? She's probably scrambling on her end right now, trying to figure out what happened to her connection. Let's cross our fingers and hope that she comes back at some point, because it is, after all, the Hey Boomer show and not the John Weiss show. This is one of the challenges of having a show, I think, is there can be technical difficulties. Let me see here. I'm getting the text. It's the John Weiss show. Okay. I just got a text from someone who's watching, and they said that it's just me right now. So until Wendy comes back, I should probably tell you that Wendy Green, who is the host of this podcast, Hey Boomer, reached out to me from my blog, and she said she'd like to interview me and talk about what I'm doing. But let me just share a bit about what Wendy Green does. This wonderful podcast she has, Hey Boomer, she interviews people who are probably retired and starting the next chapter of their lives. And she talks to the most interesting people. And it's kind of neat to listen to the blogs and the podcasts and see what see who she's been talking to. Oh, it looks like I got a text here from Wendy. She says, "Are you still connected?" Yes. Went down on her end. So I'm going to say it's the John Weiss show. I have hijacked her show. Here we go. Hijacked her show. So anyway, Wendy asked me to be on the show and talk about my background, and she had a bunch of questions for me. And tell the audience I am working on this. So she's working on it. I did. So while she's working on it, let me read some of the questions she had for me, and I'll share them with you, because we're doing this on the fly now. She said, "How did you continue your creative pursuits even while you were in law enforcement?" Well, this is a good thing for a lot of people to try. I call it creative juggling. And what that means is you have to learn how to juggle your professional life and your creative life and your passions. So what I did while I was a police chief is I would get up early so that I had time to read and have some downtime for myself before I went to work. And what I would also do is on my days off and in the evenings when I was free, I would paint and write and draw my cartoons for the newspapers. So it really becomes a question of creative juggling. I said no to things that were taking me away from my passions. So think about people who will spend your time for you if you let them. People wanted me to join boards. I was in the Rotary Club for a number of years, and that was a wonderful experience. But toward the later years, I finally resigned from the Rotary Club because I did not want to take time away from my art anymore. I quit golf because that was taking time away from my art and my writing. So it's learning to say no to things that you realize are not going to allow you to pursue your passions. So let's see. I got another text from Wendy. She says, what was the most challenging about your transition? So the most challenging thing, I think, from my transition was saying goodbye to the amazing people I work with in the police department. let's face it, most of us have full-time careers and we get to know our colleagues very well. We spend probably more time with our colleagues than we do with our families. And so for me, it was hard when I retired. We transitioned and moved as well. My son wanted to go to school in UNLV in Las Vegas. So we moved from California to Las Vegas. And that was also difficult to say goodbye to friends that I had spent 26 years with in Scotts Valley, California. The good thing is that we were only an 8-hour drive away or a 45-minute flight. And my wife's family still lives in Scotts Valley. We visit often. I talk to my friends regularly. And today with technology, you can live virtually anywhere. And thanks to Zoom and Skype, there's always a way to connect. So I found the transition away from work not that difficult. The stress of being a police chief and having those responsibilities, I didn't miss. I missed some of the experiences that came with being the police chief and working with the other professionals in my department, the emergency dispatchers, the officers, detectives, my captains. But overall, it was so exciting to dive into the next chapter of my creative life that I didn't have it that hard of a time transitioning. Let's see. Another question that Wendy had for me is, did you have a backup plan? Not really. I knew that when I retired, I would have a pension and medical benefits and that I would have income. So that made it easier for me to make a transition than somebody who is maybe mid-career, where it's much more risky to leave your career and start in something completely different. So I didn't have a big backup plan. My main plan was I could always consult in law enforcement. I knew other police chiefs that had taken on consulting positions with either private companies or other law enforcement agencies. I knew I had that as an option from my background and experience, but I didn't really want to do that. I loved my career. I was proud of it, but I was ready to do something new. I was ready for the next chapter. There is a author named David Brooks who wrote a wonderful book called The Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life. And David Brooks talks about how a lot of us start our careers, our lives, chasing that first mountain. And it's a mountain that society tends to support. And that is a mountain of professional success, fame, having some stature, some recognition, happiness. And so we chase our careers, we seek those promotions, we seek more income, more recognition. And we do these things to feel good about ourselves and to be successful. And we finally get, hopefully, to the top of that first mountain. And we look around. And what do we see? We see that we're not happy. We see that we're not perhaps fulfilled. It isn't that we're not proud of our career. It isn't that we didn't appreciate our accomplishments and the things we've done. But for some reason, maybe we're not quite satisfied or happy. And according to David Brooks, that's when we have to climb down that mountain and go search for our second mountain. And the second mountain is all about becoming other-centric instead of self-centric. In other words, when we retire, that's often when we have an opportunity to chase that second mountain, to figure out what it is we really want to do. Maybe our whole life, if you're like me, you had this creative person inside you that wanted to write and to paint and to draw cartoons and to shoot artistic photography. So in my second mountain, I finally have that opportunity to throw myself into that completely. And in doing so, I am able to hopefully entertain and inspire other people and help other people to find fulfillment and chase their creative dreams. And this is what I think David Brooks was talking about in his book, The Second Mountain, about learning how to help other people and how to find that more fulfilling life. That, I think, is one of the deep and wonderful joys about retirement, about starting that next chapter of your life. Some people are happy to rest on their laurels, and there's nothing wrong with that. They retire, they golf, they travel, they enjoy their family. And so they basically kind of status quo. And that's fine. If you're happy and you're taking care of your family, great. But I know a lot of people, they have more they want to do. They have something inside them that they want to pursue. And so my advice is, whatever your passions are, maybe you put them on hold during the first chapter of your life. My advice is, go for it. Chase that second mountain and experiment, try new things. Let's see. Wendy sent me a text. I see you on Facebook. Tell us what your dreams are 5 years from now. Okay.
Oh, we're both back.
Hey, you got to love it. Technological difficulties.
You are such a pro, John. Thank you so much for continuing the conversation. Holy cow.
I got to hijack your show for a little while.
It was the John Weiss show. Now I get to go back and listen to all the wonderful advice you gave.
I had visions of you in the background, with microphones flying. I had a good friend of mine, Elisa, who's texting me, that's listening to the show, and she's saying, hey, she's out. It's just you. And I didn't know whether it was just me on or not. I didn't know if we both went down, so I just kept talking.
I have never had that happen before, and all these wonderful people that came to watch you. So please come back, because this never happens.
Oh, it's fine. I think people know that technology. We just watching international news. You turn on a cable show, and all of a sudden, people go out. It happens.
Isn't that true? So I think when I saw, when I was watching Facebook trying to come back, you were just getting ready to talk about what your dreams are for the next 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I got your text on that. My dreams are basically, really, it's to stay healthy, love my family, the obvious things that I think everybody does when they're, in the next chapter. But beyond that, I hope to probably write more books. I'd like to maybe write some more books, publish. I am interested in possibly starting some courses. I've had people ask about cartooning, and it's really hard for me because my problem is that I have so many different interests, and it's easy to get distracted with these different interests. I took up photography recently, and I'm kind of interested in street photography, and so, I think that's the fun of it, is exploring and experimenting new things. But my main goal for the next 5 years is to continue writing. That seems to have become one of the main things that I do. I originally planned to paint full time when I retired. That was my original goal, was to paint and do some writing. And then the writing kind of took off. And so I dove into that. So I plan to continue painting as well, but the writing seems to be at the forefront.
It's interesting, right? When we transition, we do think we're going in one direction and something else opens up.
Yeah.
I know I certainly did not think I was going to be a podcaster. I just did this because I felt like we all needed some inspiration in the pandemic, and we all needed to still feel relevant. And I was like, well, I'll just do a Facebook Live. And it's turned into this. So
here you are.
Here I am, and here you are. So writing and photography seems to be another big area of your love right now, too.
Yeah, I'm newer to the area of photography. I have a friend in New Zealand who is a successful online creator. He works with businesses. But he also is an accomplished photographer, and he's the one who kind of sort of nudged me into this interest. I love black and white photography and some artful photography and street photography. And so he does some of this. And so he's always on WhatsApp chatting with me and sharing me his latest pictures and trying to push me to buy a very expensive Leica camera. And, and I think, so I got a Sony right now. I almost bought a Leica, and then I backed off, and I got a Sony, and I'm learning it. But it's been a lot of fun. And I think that's important for your listeners to remember too, is you've got to be open to new experiences. I mean, I've been painting for a long time and drawing cartoons, and I enjoy it. But sometimes, you find all of a sudden your interests sort of take a new turn, and it's fun to explore that. And now I'm incorporating a little bit of that photography into my writing. And I've considered perhaps going out here in Vegas, where there's so much, and meeting people and maybe telling some of their stories. There's a guy in New York that got quite famous doing that.
The Streets of New York.
Right. Humans of New York. And
Humans of New York.
He has an amazing, and he's branched out beyond that. And he tells stories of children and, in cancer wards and veterans who are recovering from PTSD. And as a writer, you can only pull out of yourself and your own personal experiences so much you can write about. But when you meet other people and you learn their stories, it opens up a whole nother reservoir of stories that can inspire other people. And if you work at your craft, you can hopefully do a good job of sharing those stories with others and inspiring them. And I think that's one of the joys of being a writer. And if I can incorporate perhaps some of my photography into that, that may be the next stage for me as well.
I can see that. I can see you doing that because you've shared some of your street photography in your newsletter, and
Right.
and it does pull out different feelings, different emotions, and incorporates the greater humanity, I think.
Right. It's interesting. I love the cartooning, but it's very time consuming. When I started writing on Medium, which is kind of where my writing took off, I draw these cartoons. And when I first started, I was drawing them in ink and putting watercolor on them, and then I had to scan them. It's a very laborious, slow process. Then I bought an iPad Pro and an app called Procreate, and I started drawing my cartoons on the iPad. And that really accelerated the process and made it much easier to travel. And that's great, but drawing cartoons and illustrating my articles is time consuming. And so I still do it because I really love drawing the cartoons. But I found that the photography is another venue that I can illustrate my articles, my stories. But it's very fast. You build up an inventory of photos that you like, and then you can just pick them for an article or tell someone's story from your photos. But some people follow you because they love your cartoons and they don't care about photography. And as you know, from being an online creator, every week I publish a newsletter. I probably lose 25 subscribers, just unsubscribe, because people come and go. They get an interest and then they lose you, or maybe they follow you because they like your paintings and you're not doing many paintings, so they're gone. But then other people come in that like the photography. And I guess my advice there is you got to produce work that speaks to you and your soul, and not produce stuff because you're trying to get likes or you're trying to grow an audience. You have to pay attention to what your work. If no one's interested in it, then maybe you need to change things a bit. But I've listened to my own heart.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Do you have to change things? Like, do you do things for your own self-fulfillment at this age this stage in our lives? Are we really trying to please everybody else, or are we more trying to please ourselves at this point?
I think it's a little bit of a mix, if we're honest. I mean, it's great to start a blog, let's say a WordPress blog or a Squarespace blog, and pour your heart into it and write heartfelt, beautiful, poignant stories and essays. But if you look at your analytics and no one's reading it except maybe your spouse or a friend, or maybe not even them, then if you're doing it and it's sort of an online diary and a journal and you love it, and maybe you're doing it to discipline yourself to create content for a book or something like that, great. But a lot of times people who write and create, they'd like to share that with people, and they want to know that the work that they're doing has value. And so that's where I think sometimes it's not a bad thing to look and see if people have an interest. I think the better way to do it is, rather than to create a blog or a website and put a lot of time into it, is to share your work initially on social media. Yes, social media you don't control, the algorithms change, but that's where the audiences are. And so better if you're a painter, let's say, that put your paintings up on Instagram and share them with people. Listen to the feedback. And if it's crickets, then maybe you need to work a little harder at your craft. But if people are responding, they go, hey, I like that. I like your work. I see what you're doing there. Then that's fulfilling and encouraging. That lets you know that beyond just maybe family and friends that love you and tell you how great you are, but they're not necessarily the best critics. It's much better to get feedback from strangers. So in that respect, it can be helpful. But yeah, I think you're right. In the end of the day, you've got to do what speaks to your soul, what makes you happy.
What feels right for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you retired and said, I'm just going to be a full-time creative person, did you have a backup plan?
No, during the John Weiss hijacking of the Hey Boomer show.
Did you talk about that?
I was reading some of the questions that you had
that I'd sent.
So yeah, we might talk about some of these topics. So I mentioned briefly that I didn't really have a big plan, and part of that was I was far enough along in my career that I knew that my pension and my benefits and all that were enough to sustain my family, and so I didn't have to fret over how am I going to make a living. So I didn't have to worry about a backup plan as far as making an income. But still, my main plan was to dive into my creative life. And my only backup plan was if I felt like I needed to make an income or to supplement my retirement income, I could consult. A lot of police chiefs go into consulting, whether it's with private companies or other cities or departments in one form or another, and leverage those years of experience. But I didn't really want to do that. Loved my career, spent 26 years in it, but I really
Right.
wanted to do something different. I was ready
Right.
to
Yeah.
completely start a new life, and I haven't regretted it for a minute.
So you talk about the discipline you learned in law enforcement, and
Yep.
now you're this creative. Can you give us an idea of what a day in the life of an artful life looks like?
Sure. It's not very exciting. It's getting up in the morning. The first thing I do is take my dogs for their morning walk. I joke with my wife and say I've gone from serving a city council in a city to serving 2 dogs and a cat, because it seems like these animals, they have me wrapped around their paws. So I'm up in the morning and I'm having my coffee. I usually start the day by reading the newspaper online on my iPad and catching up on the news. I've sort of shunned cable news a couple of years ago. I got so fed up with the bickering and the partisanship, and it just got to be so. And me being a news junkie for many years in my career, at first it was kind of hard because I like to keep up on everything, but I found it's much faster to just read the morning news online and spend an hour and not have to listen to it repackaged looping all day long. Mm-hmm. So I would read my morning paper, walk my dogs, and then I like to read in the morning sometimes. I seem to get the creative juices going, and then I dive into usually writing after that. And I'll write until about noon, take a break, because by then the dogs want their lunch and their next walk. And God bless those dogs, because they get me out of the house. I'm a bit of a hermit. I have a good friend of mine, Bruce, who says, "John, you're too much of a hermit. You got to get out more." I guess maybe having had such a social career for so long, being involved with so many people and almost over socialized out of necessity, being a public figure, that I rather enjoy my privacy and my downtime at home and my office and my library. But I do get out of the house quite a bit and go shoot photography now, and I like to work out. So I have a home gym and I work out midday. And then in the later afternoon, I'm usually back at it doing either artwork, more reading, or some painting. And then in the evenings, I try very hard to get done around 6. My wife's a nurse. She's an amazing nurse, and she works 3 days a week. Mm-hmm. And so those 3 days, even though I am not a chef, I make dinner for us those 3 days. So when she gets home, my son and I and my wife sit down and have dinner, talk about our day. And then we do what's called pack time, which is where we sit down usually in the living room and we'll watch a program on television or read, hang out with the animals. Sometimes I'm on my laptop and we'll sneak in some time to do some work. And that's when I will allow myself to go down some YouTube rabbit holes and watch videos of photographers I'm interested in or artists. So that's pretty much my day. And I do that Monday through Friday. Saturdays are my busiest day because I put out my newsletter on Saturdays. So if I have had writer's block or a problem getting an article done that week, then sometimes I'm catching up on Saturday.
Sounds like a pretty nice day. The dogs enjoy it.
I have to say, I feel very blessed. I remember many times talking to my mother in the last year or two of my career, where I would visit with her. I used to visit her every Sunday and take care of her and tell her, "Mom, I love my job, but I'm so anxious and ready to have more time for my artwork and writing." And I had worked very hard to what I call it creative juggling, where I'd have to juggle free time and say no to certain things. Mm-hmm. I talked about this too during our little technological. And so my mom used to say, "That time will come, John. That season will come, and it has arrived, and it's worth it." And I still, if my dad were with us, I'd give him a hug right now, because his advocacy to follow a career that was reliable has enabled me to have the luxury to retire in my 50s and start another career as a creator and not have the stress of having to worry about how I'm going to pay for the mortgage or the car. Mm-hmm. I'm not a rich man in terms of money. I'm comfortable, but I feel like I'm rich because I have my health. I have a wonderful family and friends, and I'm allowed to do the things that I love to do.
Yeah. And we're richer for knowing you. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
As I said, go to John's website, johnpweiss.com, and see all the stuff he does, but definitely subscribe to his newsletter. I cherish getting that newsletter every day. I mean, every Saturday.
Well, thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
And kudos to you too for what you're doing. There are a lot of people that reach retirement and they don't know what they're going to do next. Sometimes they're adrift. Sometimes it's hard to let go of our professional lives and the titles we've had and the responsibilities. And we can sometimes fall into this feeling of irrelevancy. And the only way out of that is to dive into passions and family and decide what you want to do next. And there's so much out there. And I think your listeners shouldn't be afraid to experiment. Because like this lady you mentioned, that was the rowing. I mean, my gosh, who knew, now she's competing in rowing. I mean, there's people that had amazing second chapters. People live so long now. It's like, oh my gosh, dive into it. Try different things until you find that thing that makes your heart just go a twitter.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. Try different things because we don't always know what it's going to be in this next act, but it's limitless possibilities. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being on this podcast today and for taking over for a little while. That was pretty awesome.
That was a fun adventure. Thank you.
So we're going to stick with the creative theme for next week. My guest next week is Hans Henrik Petersen, and he grew up in Denmark, was educated in the Royal Danish Academy of Art in Copenhagen.
Wow.
I know, right? Moved to New York in 1976 and began his career as a graphic designer. And in 2005, he also felt compelled to go back to his full creative life. And now he's an abstract expressionist painter.
Wow.
Yeah, and he shows in galleries, and designers use his work when they're designing homes. And so I think that is going to be a very interesting conversation as well. Yeah. So
well, tell him if you have any technological difficulties to call me. I'll give him some tips in case he has to do a one person show for a little bit.
Golly, I hope that doesn't happen again anytime soon. Like I said, it's never. We lost internet once, and I had a musician on then, but we completely went down. He went down. No. Everybody went down. But yeah, so
it was fun.
You were great. So if you like what we're doing on Hey Boomer and you want to support the creative lifestyle of Hey Boomer, you can buy me a coffee. It's a way to fund the show. So you can do one coffee for $5. You can do a yearly membership for $75. It's at www.buymeacoffee.com/heyboomer0413. April 13th is when we went live for the first time. And join our Facebook group. We have a private group for people that are going through this transitional time in life and just looking for community and support and other people to talk to and bounce ideas off of. So if you're interested in that, drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz and I will send you an invite to that group. So thank you again, John, and thank you everybody for tuning in and hanging in there with us while we went down. And I just want to remind you all to live with passion, live with relevance, live with courage, and remember we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.